The alarm rang at exactly 6:30 a.m., sharp and unforgiving, just like Ayesha's life had been for years. She reached out from beneath the thin blanket, silencing it with a groan. Another day of deadlines, quiet insults disguised as advice, and a salary that barely kept her breathing. She lay there for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment, wondering when survival had replaced living. Her phone buzzed again and again and again. Annoyed, she grabbed it, then froze. Notifications flooded her screen so fast they blurred into one another. News alerts, emergency broadcasts, messages from unknown numbers. Her heart began to race, a familiar anxiety creeping in, the kind she'd felt the night Kamran walked out of her life with a cold smile and a cruel sentence. Love doesn't pay bills. She opened the first alert. Global financial emergency. All major currencies devalued overnight. Her breath caught. She sat up abruptly, scrolling with trembling fingers. Devaluation rate 100,000 times. Savings rendered nearly worthless. Markets suspended indefinitely. Outside her window, sirens wailed. Somewhere down the street, people shouted. The city was waking up into panic. This can't be real, she whispered. She opened her banking app, half expecting it to crash like everything else. The numbers loaded slowly, painfully. Her eyes skimmed past the decimals, then snapped back. Her monthly salary, $3,000, but the value indicator beside it had changed, so much that her mind refused to process it. She did the math again and again. Her hands began to shake. While the world's billionaires lost everything, her modest income, once mocked, once dismissed, had multiplied into a fortune beyond imagination. A soft, broken laugh escaped her lips, not joy, not yet. It was disbelief mixed with years of swallowed humiliation finally surfacing. She thought of Kamran, of how he'd compared her to richer women, how he'd called her dreams cute but useless, of family members who reminded her she was earning too little to matter, of colleagues who passed her over because she didn't come from money. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. For the first time, she wasn't rushing to explain herself. She wasn't apologizing for existing. She wasn't shrinking. She stood up slowly and walked to the window. Smoke rose in the distance. The world outside was collapsing under the weight of suddenly worthless wealth. Inside her chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Strength. The universe hadn't been kind to her, but it had been precise. And as the city fell into chaos, Ayesha realized one terrifying, beautiful truth. The morning had made everything worthless, except her. By mid-morning, the city no longer sounded like itself. Sirens screamed without pause, car horns blared in frustration, and people shouted from balconies as if volume alone could bring value back to their lives. Ayesha moved through it all in stunned silence, her phone vibrating endlessly in her hand. Names she hadn't seen in years flashed across the screen. An aunt who once told her she was too ambitious for her own good sent a trembling voice note asking if she was safe. A former friend who disappeared after borrowing money typed long paragraphs about destiny and fate. Even her old office group chat silent since the day she resigned had suddenly come alive with forced jokes and nervous greetings. She read them all. She replied to none. Each message felt like a fingerprint from the past, reminding her who had walked away when she had nothing to offer. Betrayal didn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it came quietly, in the form of people choosing convenience over loyalty. Her phone rang again. This time, she recognized the number before it fully appeared. Kamran. Her chest tightened, not with longing, but with memory. The night he left replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. The cafe lights, his impatient sighs, The way he avoided her eyes while explaining that his future required someone more stable. He hadn't even apologized. She let the call ring out. Seconds later, a message arrived. Ayesha, I know this is sudden, but I've been thinking about you. Are you okay? Maybe we should talk. She stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Talk, as if words could undo the way he'd measured her worth in numbers and walked away when they didn't impress him. She slipped her phone into her bag and stepped outside. The air felt heavier, charged with fear. Lines curled around closed banks. Grown men argued with security guards. People who once held power now begged for answers. When she reached her old office building, the doors were still open, but the energy inside was frantic. Managers whispered, executives paced, people who never noticed her before suddenly looked up. She walked past them calmly. At the reception desk, the same woman who once scolded her for arriving 2 minutes late now smiled nervously. Ayesha, we heard about your situation. She said carefully, maybe we can discuss opportunities. Ayesha smiled back, polite and distant. Opportunities. How strange that the world had to collapse for them to see her. She took the elevator alone, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored walls. She didn't look different, but she felt it. Years of being underestimated had hardened into something unbreakable. Betrayal had taken so much from her, but now it had given her clarity, and clarity, she realized, was the most dangerous kind of power. Power did not arrive in Ayesha's life like a storm. It came quietly, settling into her bones the way exhaustion once had. By the end of the first week, contracts were signed, assets transferred, and systems rewritten. The same people who once dismissed her ideas now waited outside conference rooms, rehearsing respectful tones. She watched it all with steady eyes. Revenge had tempted her in the beginning. There were moments late at night, when she imagined shutting doors the way they once had on her. But every time anger rose, it was followed by something stronger, memory. She remembered how cruelty felt. She remembered promising herself that if she ever had power, she would use it differently. Her first decision shocked everyone. She kept most of the staff. Not the executives who hoarded credit, but the quiet ones, the assistant who used to slip her encouraging notes, the analyst who stayed late without recognition, the cleaner who always greeted her like she mattered. She doubled their salaries, protected their jobs, and gave them something they had never been offered before: security. Word spread quickly. Ayesha wasn't destroying lives, she was rebuilding them. Then Kamran requested a meeting. She agreed without hesitation. He arrived early, pacing the lobby like a stranger in his own skin. His expensive watch was gone. His confidence, once sharp and careless, had dulled into nervous politeness. When she entered, he stood too quickly, knocking his chair back. Ayesha, he said, forcing a smile, you look amazing. She nodded, nothing more. They sat across from each other, silence stretching between them. He spoke first, words spilling out in apology, shaped sentences. He blamed pressure, bad timing, fear. He spoke of love as if it were something misplaced, not abandoned. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she slid a single folder across the table. Inside was a contract, an entry-level position, temporary, closely supervised. His hands trembled as he read. You want me to work for you? He asked quietly. I want you to work. She corrected, for yourself, the way I had to. His eyes filled with something close to shame. I loved you, he whispered. Ayesha met his gaze, calm and unwavering. I loved myself enough to survive you, she replied. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. As she walked away, she felt no thrill, no rush of victory, just lightness. Revenge had not come from humiliation or punishment. It came from dignity, and dignity, she realized, was the one thing betrayal could never take from her again. Months passed, and the world slowly found its new rhythm. Currencies stabilized, markets reopened, and people began to rebuild their lives with the bitter lessons of the collapse etched deeply into their minds. Headlines no longer screamed panic. They spoke of resilience, of adaptation, of lessons learned too late. Yet, amid the chaos, one life had been quietly transformed, untouched by desperation, guided not by greed, but by the clarity that only survival and betrayal could bring. Ayesha stood on the balcony of her modest apartment, overlooking the glowing city below. The skyline shimmered with new lights, new towers, and new ambitions. She breathed in the crisp evening air, a soft smile curling her lips. Her fortune, now unimaginable, rested safely in accounts she barely glanced at. She didn't need it for status, for attention, or for the hollow approval of those who had once scorned her. She needed it only to live on her own terms, to create value, to lift those who had deserved it long before the world realized they needed it. Her phone vibrated, and she glanced at it. Messages from old friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives, now dripping with gratitude or envy, scrolled endlessly. She read a few, then set it aside. She didn't respond, not because she was cruel, but because she had learned that her worth did not depend on anyone's recognition. She had spent years trying to prove herself to people who would never understand her value. Now she didn't need to. Her thoughts wandered to Kamran. He had tried to rebuild his life quietly, learning humility the hard way. Their paths had crossed once more at a professional summit, where he stood in a room full of people who once mocked him. She passed him without a word, her gaze forward, and for a fleeting moment she saw regret in his eyes, not for her, but for himself. Ayesha turned back to the city and felt a deep sense of peace she had never known. She had survived a world that tried to define her worth in numbers, and had discovered something far more valuable: her own strength, her own courage, and her own ability to forgive. Not others, but herself. She whispered into the quiet night, almost to herself, "I survived, not the world, not betrayal, but the belief that I was ever less than I deserved to be." And in that moment, she realized the ultimate truth. Money, power, or revenge could never compare to the wealth of knowing your own value, the calm of reclaiming your life, and the joy of standing tall when the world tried to crumble around you. Ayesha smiled, a soft, radiant smile, because she finally understood. The richest woman was not the one with the most money, but the one who had learned to forgive, to rise, and to love herself unconditionally. For the first time, she slept without fear. She lived without apology, and she dreamed freely, knowing that no betrayal, no collapse, and no world could ever take away the treasure she had finally found, herself.